going to the Mana base to check out us and Nikachu, the Merfolk Master. You know, Danny, I actually got paired against Nikachu the other day in Moto, and he beat me. I didn't hold up the LTO Sparrow shift. He took us down.
Did he kill you with Merfolk?
He killed me with Spell Queller, which would be like the standard Merfolk.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, it was
That I would consider that the standard Merfolk. You got like Curse Catcher, kind of.
yeah, exactly.
I guess. Okay, sure.
Yeah, sure, whatever. I know. We're stretching. But you know what else you don't have to do? You can stretch all your dollars at the Game Grid because they have such great deals. Game Grid, just another great store in Utah. Actually, the reason I'm here and Spencer is not here is because Spencer is moving and he'll actually be close to the Game Grid now, right, Danny?
Oh yeah, we're gonna like get to play more events together. Should be cool.
Yeah, it's
Excited.
awesome. Yeah, there you go. But we just wanted to give a big shout out to our sponsors. Without them and you guys, the patrons, we wouldn't be able to do the show that we are. But we've got a big show today. We're going to talk about the process of picking cards, and we're going to talk about Danny Cathrow's PT experience and the cards we're up and down on. So, Danny, let's just give like a quick overview. How did the Pro Tour go from you from a limited perspective?
So not as well as I would have hoped. After my first draft, I was pretty happy. I thought I had a pretty solid deck. It was blue-red. I had the Bloodwater Entity as like a solid uncommon that I got pretty late, so I felt like the colors were pretty open. And then I had two sweepers. I had Hour of Devastation, Sweltering Suns, a good curve of creatures. So my deck definitely like played a little weird, but mostly I think I neglected to draft some sideboard cards. I think I had a late opportunity to pick up a Demolish, an artifact destruction spell.
Mm-hmm.
And I lost to Godpharaoh's Gift in one of the matches where I would have easily won, and the only card that they had in their whole deck that I couldn't really answer was Godpharaoh's Gift. And they just played it like on turn 5 both games, and I just lost easily. And I feel like I could have definitely had a good shot in that matchup if I might have drafted a sideboard card over a replaceable 3-drop or another option. So
there you go. Anyone of note did you play against in limited portion? Did you just beat Huey? Anything sweet?
I don't think I played anyone notable in the limited portion. I played a lot of good people in the constructed rounds, but yeah, in the limited version, my drafts were a lot of.
You were the notable person in your draft. You were Silver Pro and host of Limited Time Only Danny Cathro.
I guess more notable, but maybe not. Who knows?
Who knows? It depends on the circle, right?
That's
But
true.
so, how do you feel about your preparation for Limited at the Pro Tour? How do you think it went? Do you guys think you had a good read on the metagame and everything? Where do you feel like you were at looking back on it?
I think I definitely got into I was happy with my colors, and I felt like I kind of read the table, and I was in blue-red both times, but it felt pretty open both times. Like I got past rares and mythics in both of my drafts, so I felt like I read the table okay, but I might not have been as on top of the metagame as possible. Like I felt good. Like I think my decks were good, and I did a fine job.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the green decks were even more powerful than I thought of. Like I drafted them and had a lot of fun with them, but I think it might just be one of the most legitimate strategies in the format. And a lot of the most successful draft decks that I saw were just green decks that could take any powerful uncommon. And it's like it's a strong strategy. There's not a lot of aggressive decks in the format that can punish it. So I think I could have skewed my drafts even a little more heavily towards drafting that type of deck. I'm not sure if I would have still, based on what I saw. But I think I undervalued it, even though I liked it a lot.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, it's hard, and you want to make sure you don't get too inbred or anything like that too. So these things happen. But let's move on to our biggest mover. So, Danny, what is your biggest mover after playing the Pro Tour?
So these are a little weird. So my biggest mover up is going to be Firebrand Archer. So the reason why is red lacks 2-drops in Hour of Devastation. So the two common 2-drops that you have are Firebrand Archer and then the vanilla 2/2 Kenra.
Mm-hmm.
And Firebrand Archer is definitely much better than the Kenra, especially if you're in blue-red, which has felt like one of the stronger color combinations in red. I think most of the red decks want to be aggressive, but it's hard to do that when the red 2-drops aren't very powerful. And so found myself wanting to pick up Firebrand Archer higher than I would have thought initially, just because you have to have 2 drops, and half of your deck is red, so most of the like half of them are probably gonna have to be red. And this is it's like the only good common in the set that's red and a 2 drop. So it's kind of what you have. So I've had to move it up in my pick order, and it's pretty good. It gets us a lot better in blue red because you have aerial guides to turn it on, unsummons to get an extra damage. So it plays like a 3-power 2 drop a lot of times.
Mm-hmm.
I've just been impressed. I think it's necessary also. So
Yeah, I think it's a necessity thing, but even though it's by necessity, it isn't the worst thing ever.
yeah, exactly.
Yep. My biggest mover is Oasis Ritualist, I believe is the name of the card. It is the one that can birds tap or exert to tap for 2 of any color. Kind of talking about what you were saying with the green decks being kind of bigger and a legitimate strategy. I've really liked drafting those decks, and they seem to be open. When I was drafting them, I had to come on a few times. I did, and so I was having a lot of success with them. And I really liked them, and it was just it felt really powerful to take cards like that, Oasis Ritualist early, and then just be like, oh, I'm just going to take the best stuff that's open and really lets you stay open in your draft, your green X or whatever. So it's kind of where I am with it.
For that same reason, that's kind of what my biggest mover down has been. So I still really like this card, but my biggest mover down is going to be Ronus' Stalwart. I think the card is great, and for example, if it was a red card, might be my biggest mover up. Like, I think just green doesn't always play out very aggressive, and you don't have to build an aggressive green deck. And so Ronus' Stalwart really only goes into one green deck reliably. Like, you really want it in green white specifically, but besides that, you don't really need that powerful of a 2-drop. Like, that's not what you're trying to pick up. You're trying to get late game and Oasis Ritualist. So just because of how the decks in green that you want to draft line up, I've moved Ronus' Stalwart down a little bit on my pick order.
Yep, that's definitely reasonable. The card's fine, but this time doesn't seem like it plays out a whole lot, like you said. You just a lot of board stalls and stuff. And kind of a similar thing is I'm kind of down on Unsummon. I was originally kind of down on it, and then like people talking about blue red, and I moved up a little bit, and I'm just kind of back to where I was, where it's like it's fine. Like, it's not the worst card ever going to be in your deck. It's not going to be the worst card ever in your deck. Sorry, but it's just kind of like it's like milk toast. I'm not happy. Just like, get out of here.
No, that makes sense. You can definitely get clogged on Unsummons. Like, it's an effect that you don't want too many of, because then it gets really detrimental to your deck.
Yeah. It's either like, a lot of times it's either the best thing ever or it's just useless. So, at least in my experience. All right, well, that's our ups and downs for the week. So let's move on to color of the week. Danny, you chose black this week. There's a little bit of controversy going on with Black Cards Matter this week. What's going on?
Yeah, so I've heard quite a bit of varying opinions on black. So the one opinion that I've heard is that it's the worst color by a lot, and all the other colors are close and playable, but black is really bad.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that's true. But I can definitely kind of get behind where it is a little bit less powerful than some of the other colors. A lot of some of the uncommons aren't that great, and there are certain color combinations which I don't like black very much.
Yeah. So what do you think it pairs well with?
So, I mean, blue-black, I've heard that people like the cycling deck, but I've had a little bit of a hard time drafting it. I think if it's very open, it's a good deck, but I've mostly wanted to get in if I can start off with like an Ominous Sphinx, or Abandoned Sarcophagus is actually a really interesting card. I think if you have a blue-black cycling deck, Abandoned Sarcophagus can be like a bomb, because it can be like a 3-mana draw 10 eventually. It will eventually draw, you get double, you get your whole deck pretty much if you have that card out, which is really, really powerful. And then also Vile Manifestation is really, really important in that deck.
Yeah, Black Tarmogoyf.
Yeah. But if you don't get those specific cards and you're just kind of taking random Grizzly Survivors and other random black cards, I don't like the deck very much. So that's how I feel about blue-black. Black-red, you're mostly just kind of playing a pile of good cards. Like, if black-red is open and you get a lot of removal, then it's fine. But I don't think it's a great color combination in general.
Mm-hmm. What about green-black?
Green-black? So the problem with judging green decks is most of the green decks in this format are like they're green and then whatever else. Very like most of them don't play out like, oh, I have a green black deck
Mhm.
and I'm strictly green black. Like I've mostly found that like I'll play a green deck that has some black cards in it,
Yeah.
and it's fine. But like straight green black, like the synergies aren't really there. You don't get rewarded for staying in green black.
Mhm. What about black white then?
Black white. So I think that's probably the most reliable color combination. So if you get a late, um, the zombie uncommon from Hour of Devastation,
Lord
then
of
that can be a no, the Hour of Devastation one. So it's
Oh, the one that gives indestructible to an attacking zombie.
yeah, and Death Touch and Lifelink.
Death Touch and Lifelink. Sorry.
The gold colored one. So I think that card is really good. And so if you get that card, I would try to like it's definitely a good sign and you can move in. And that deck it gets a lot of payoff in the third pack, which other people won't be looking for.
Mhm.
So I think the Black White Zombies deck is really good in this format, and it's probably the best like black deck that you can reliably get if it's open. But I think that's the main issue that I've had with black is that it just kind of requires certain cards from the color,
Mhm.
and there's a lot of cards in the color that just like aren't that great. That have me like, I think it's definitely playable still. Like I think people are kind of exaggerating when they're saying that it's like really bad.
Wait, Magic players are exaggerating? We never do
Yeah,
that. I've never seen a Magic player exaggerate ever. Like I'm not joking when I say
Never.
ever. Like I'm trying to think of a situation and like maybe once, but like not really.
Yeah, me neither. I think
Yeah.
you're right.
Yeah.
But so I've had fine success with black, but I definitely would be careful of just kind of falling into black, but having a pile of mediocre cards. Like that can definitely happen.
All right. Well, what are some of the notable black commons? Like what is like the black common you're kind of wanting to open?
Yeah, so I think the best black common by quite a bit is Torment of Venom. But it's a big commitment. It's double black, so it's definitely like your deck has to be mostly black. Like you can't kind of fall into that green splash a bunch of cards deck as easily if you first pick Torment of Venom, which I think is part of the problem with that card. Right away it's limiting the decks that you can play it in. But I think it's on power level the best card by quite a bit. Lethal Sting has kind of underperformed. It's an unconditional removal spell, kind of, but it's a condition on your end, but not on the end of what you're killing.
Yeah.
But,
A cool twist on it.
Yeah, it's interesting. But I think that card's okay. You kind of have to make sure you draft 2-drops, like the walls and stuff, for proving combatants. But.
And so you have the notable uncommon as Torment of Scarabs. You're just all about tormenting your opponents. What is so notable about Torment of Scarabs?
So this card is unique. It's definitely still hotly discussed, I think. I think the verdict is that it's at least playable in everyone's eyes, and it ranges from at least playable to, in certain decks, it's actively great. So most of the decks that I've drafted have been centered around Torment of Scarabs because I find it fun first. I think it's enjoyable to kind of slowly grind someone out with the incremental advantage that it provides.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're not beating them down at all, they get like 6 free activations. So it's like 4 mana, do nothing for 6 turns if you're on the back foot, which is just pretty bad. You definitely don't want to play it when it's that mode. But if you can play it where you have a board and they are like if they're behind on board when you play this card, then I think it puts them in a really tough spot and all of their decisions are bad and you really start kind of
taking over.
Yeah, you can take over the game with it. Even with just like a bunch of 2-drops. Like most of my decks have just been a pile of Catchers, Avengers, and Torment of Scarabs, and I just kind of attack them, and then they like slowly just run out of resources, and you win. But yeah.
It's kind of wrapping up like where we are with the color in the week here. Black seems like an interesting spot. It does kind of seem like your seat needs to be telling you to draft like a black X deck. It seems very hard to be going out and be like, I want to draft the black-blue cycling deck. You need to very much be reading your table, which, is part of the process. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I definitely am higher on black than a lot of people. Like, I think the decks are good, and they're very interesting decks. So I think the problem with the black decks is some of them are very difficult to draft. Like, blue-black cycling is actually pretty tough. Like, you have to have the right combination of impactful spells, but also you just need a lot of cyclers.
Mhm.
And you're kind of trying to set yourself up as well as possible to get really rewarded in the last pack. Um, you're just kind of hoping like someone opens a Drakehaven, someone opens a
If near.
like if near, yeah, mostly you open the if near,
Yeah.
the person directly to your left or right, but
Mhm.
which can happen. And then when you do that, this set supports those cards really well, but it's just kind of strange because you don't get the payoffs until the end, or like the super powerful payoffs. Like you
Mhm.
get Biomanifestation and Abandoned Sarcophagus, but those are kind of like you have to commit pretty hard before those are playable cards or actively good cards, I guess.
All right. Well, that was our color of the week, and now let's move on to the training grounds, Danny. I'm excited to talk about this one. This is talking about the process. So, Danny, what do we mean when we say talking about the process?
So I think today we're specifically talking about the process of making a pick when it's close. So this comes up a lot, and it's probably the one of the more important skills in drafting, and one of the most talked about like aspects of drafting is you're in a draft, and whether at the beginning or in the middle or near the end, you have a pick where like both of you have multiple options that are all justifiable, and you're trying to decide which of these close cards you want to pick. And so we just kind of want to talk about like what are some of the things that should be running through your mind when you're making that decision, and how can you like kind of break down that decision into its parts so that you can make the correct decision more often.
Yeah, our kind of our goal today is kind of break down what we think are like the five most important things, and then you can kind of run these things through your head, and hopefully this will help you. And one of the great things about draft is that you get to do this with every card, and every single time the way you evaluate things changes it drastically. Just kind of going back to a second ago, we're talking about black. Danny evaluates it a little differently than others, and as such, his entire drafting is different. So it's kind of a critical part of the process of drafting. So let's start with kind of the stuff that happens before you even sit down to draft, Danny. Let's talk about color preferences because they do play a role in drafting.
Definitely. So a lot of people refer to like the most ideal way of drafting is that you have no preference. You like solely read the table, and you like find whichever colors are open, or you can like whichever colors you view as the most successful ones that you could draft in that seat, and be willing to go anywhere. And I think that is probably ideal, but at the same time, it's not very realistic. Like, I think a lot of times we'll have personal preferences, and we'll judge the colors in a set differently than other people. And so I think a lot of our personal opinions on the different colors is going to have a pretty strong impact on which cards you take.
Mm-hmm.
An example in this set is like Open Fire and Ambuscade.
Mm-hmm.
So both of those cards are really good. I think they're really close power level, and you could argue either side of which one is better. And
Yeah.
so having that come down to a color preference is like a really reasonable decision. If you feel like you're a more skilled drafter drafting green or drafting red decks, or you feel like the red decks are more successful than the green ones, or vice versa, like that should be a big impact on which one you first picked.
Mm-hmm.
And like I think that's okay. Like I don't think having a preference for a color that kind of goes beyond judging it as better is a problem. Like if I feel like I know how to draft blue black cycling, and I have an advantage in doing that, I think hedging in that direction isn't a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can't take it too far, right? Because you can't just be jumping like you can't be forcing the deck that the archetype that you want to draft every time, because
Yeah.
then you're not going to get open picks. But I think you can have preferences and have them influence your picks, and it be correct and okay.
Yeah, and I think that's also a very hard line to toe as well. It's important to like know like what your strengths are in Magic, but it's also important to not let that blind you to what the table is telling you. It's like, yeah, I really like green decks in Magic, and I really like green decks in this format, but the table is kind of telling me, hey, I need to be like red blue right now. And so it is a hard line, and it's something that it's really hard to follow. But I agree, it's kind of ideally, yes, you would sit down at the table and not have any predispositions about anything. You just read whatever the table tells you. But just as people, they don't really think that way. Lots of times for people, they're going to sit down, they're effing in the draft, and some guy next to them is like, I'm on blue red. Danny Cathro, my favorite silver pro, drafted blue red at the Pro Tour both times. So am I. And so just like these things can affect your draft and just the way everything goes. So I think color preference is a lot more real than I think a lot of pros give credit for. And that's one of the things I really like about LSV is he talked about how he will normally lean towards blue cards over other colors. Like if he has the choice because he just likes the blue cards. He likes the way they play and he thinks that he can do it.
Like he feels like he will play better and draft better in those colors. And that I think that's totally fine. And it applies to standard too. Like if you feel like you play aggro decks better, even though a control deck might be slightly like more powerful in the format, you can still default and play an aggro deck. Like there's you can play to your strengths, and that can be a good thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like knowing your learning style and your play style is something very important to Magic and in life in general, to be honest. And so, just being able to identify those things, I think is just like you said, very important. Even though we all know Ambuscade was the correct pick in your earlier example, it's a 2-for-1 every time. I've never seen that card not be a 2-for-1.
What are you talking about?
Every time I cast that card, I'm just like killed something in combat, like our 2/3s butted heads. And I just like killed another thing, and it's just like I never get Ambuscade. So I have a
feel
very
like
small
your opponents
results.
don't play instants.
Oh,
Most of my opponents play instants.
That's why you're Silver Pro Danny Cathro, and I'm Mason Clark. There's a difference. Yeah.
I should convince my opponents not play instants.
Yeah, you might be a Gold Pro.
Yeah, just set baseline rules.
Yeah, hey, I just want you to know you're not allowed to play instants against me, and we're gonna have a great time, and we'll talk about it afterwards. And
nothing wrong.
Yeah, yeah. So speaking of saying those rules, let's talk about being openness. Like we're being open with our opponents right there. How do you feel about being open at a table? Because we just talked about color preference, and we talked about how, in theory, you'd be like the soulless zombie. Where do you stand on the first couple picks, stuff like that? Like, where do you go with openness?
All right, let's keep this example going. So let's say that we first picked Ambuscade because we like green decks.
Yeah.
And then in the next pack we have another Ambuscade or another Open Fire. Well, then obviously it's way, way better to take the Ambuscade because we leave our options open into going into a second color. So I think what we're specifically talking about here is you want to kind of to keep your options open for as long as possible. So if in pack 1 you can stay almost monocolored and then have a couple cards in a couple different colors, that's a really powerful spot to be. Because then if you open a bomb rare in another color, you can just take it reliably and know that you got 7 playables in pack 1 in one color. And so you can just take this, Scarab God and just know that you can play it and that you can morph your draft around that because you've left yourself open by trying to stick to one color as much as possible. So it gets closer when the power levels aren't the same. So let's say that there's, you have some white cards, and then there's an Oketra's Avenger and an Open Fire. So Open Fire is better, but Oketra's Avenger is also really good. And I would probably say that it's probably worth it, depending on what your deck looks like, to just take the Oketra's Avenger, a really good card in your deck that you're going to want actively, and stay to one color, and kind of give yourself more information about what's the second color that you want to pick up for your deck.
So I have a question. So let's use that same example where a white deck, we've got an Oketra's Avenger, some white rare or whatever, right? But let's say that the card isn't Open Fire. Let's say it's something more powerful like Pride Sovereign, right? I guess that goes into white. So I don't know. Let's take another. Let's just say you aren't white. Let's say you're blue, right?
Yeah.
How do you evaluate it there? Because that's clearly a pretty big signal that hey, these people don't want to be green. How do you evaluate that kind of point in the draft when this comes to staying open?
It's always a sliding scale. That's what makes draft really interesting and why a lot of people it's their favorite format is because it's all these intricate details that you're trying to weigh in your mind. So you can value openness differently also. Let's say that you're in green, you can kind of hedge and take different colored cards, and there's still a good chance that you're going to be able to play both of them in this format. So if you were in green and someone passed a Torment of Hailfire, you could take that card and you could reliably play it. You could just kind of make a note that you needed to pick up some Oasis Ritualist, maybe Manalith, maybe some Open Sand or Beneath the Sand.
Yep.
Yeah, like you could try to like make it work in your deck, and that's something that you could do because you're in a color that leaves you pretty open on what you can draft. But
Hmm.
if you're in like maybe red white aggro and someone passes you a Pride Sovereign, like you kind of you've left you're not open. Like you're that color combination isn't good at splashing, and then like the card would have to be really really good for you to do that.
Hmm.
Um, I think especially early in a draft, like if I'm in like pack one or the first pick or two of pack two, then I am normally I'm pretty open with the idea of taking a more powerful card. I
Hmm.
think that the upside is a lot higher and that you can get paid off because if you are seeing that powerful card, that means that that color is going to come in pack three, and you can hope to kind of pick up more playables to fill out your deck,
Hmm.
and you can play with this really good card. So.
What do you think about? I believe it was Ben Stark was on Limited Resources, and he was talking about how a lot of the time he'll just take the most powerful card out of the pack for like the first three picks, regardless of color. What do you think about that kind of strategy? Because
So
that is staying open in another sense, right?
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so instead of yeah, so I think that that makes a lot of sense. In drafts more recently, you normally wind up with a playable 24th, 25th, 26th card. They're normally not great, but they're normally like fine. And that is an argument for trying to just take the actual best card for the first three, four picks, just because you're not worried about how many cards you're gonna get. Like it's very rare in modern day draft that you look at like you're looking at your deck at the end and you're like, wow, I only have 19 playables. Like I have to kind of play four really bad cards. Like that's not normally how things work out. Um, and so because of that, you can just take the actual best card and really, really just try to find which colors aren't being drafted to your right. And then that sets you up to get the most reward in pack three.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I generally hedge towards I'll take like a slightly like nothing like too different, but I'll take a slightly less powerful card to stay in one color. Um,
Mm-hmm.
that's just I prefer drafting like that. I like kind of having my options open to me, especially in pack two. Like if I open a really good card, I like to be able to just take it and play it.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but at the same time, there's lots of merit in just taking the best card for the straight three picks, even if it's in three different colors. So.
Yep. All right, so let's talk about mana curve. So when you're picking a card, being aware of where it falls in your curve, how highly do you weigh that, Danny?
So I am a big proponent of drafting aggressive decks that have lots of two drops and try to get free wins by going two drop, three drop, four drop. I think that's one of the best ways to draft a deck that can win without bombers. Because you'll just get so many free wins if your opponent doesn't play a two drop and is on the draw. Like if you go two drop, three drop, and then they answer with their three drop, like they're really far behind, and you can just get 10 points or like hit them for 10 before they really have any way to get back into the game.
Mm-hmm.
And so I value a good mana curve a lot. Um, I think one of the most important things with mana curve that you need to know is it takes some knowledge of the set. So for example, in this set, if I'm drafting a red deck and I open the Burning Fist Minotaur, which is a really good red two drop, that card has gone up a lot for me because I know that red decks don't have that many good two drops. And so getting a premium two drop in my red deck is something that I really, really want. And it's probably like it's better than getting a good red removal spell in my book because you can get different red removal spells. So
Like a
like
puncturing blow.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So if I really know that I need to fill in my two drop slot in my red decks. And so I like really stress mana curve at the two drop slot. But there could be other formats where there's lots of two drops and maybe there aren't very many finishers. Like there might not be many five or six drops. Like that hasn't happened for a while, but that could happen. And then you open up like a hippo and you're like, okay, I need to take this hippo because I know there's not very many big creatures in the set and this lines up really well, and I want to have something at the top of my curve. So it goes both ways. Depending on how the format shakes out, it really influences what, like, how high you need to stress your mana curve.
Mhm. Okay, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. So here's a question about just mana curve in general. Let's say you're in like pack three, right? So in this case, it'd be Amonkhet, and you get
Yeah,
something like a Trial of Zeal, but you already have like Trial of Zeal is in your pack. You already have a bunch of 3 drops, but you also get just a Nefcrop Entangler, let's say, and you're
yep,
like medium on 2 drops. So you have a couple. How much
yeah,
does like everything we've talked about weigh in there? Because it's
yeah.
another
Those are the
three
hard
drop.
ones.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm normally pretty good of I take 2 drops high enough that I try really hard not to leave myself in that position,
Mm-hmm.
and I would recommend that. So you really don't want to be going into pack three and being like, all right, pretty much every 2 drop that I see, I have to take it because I have 1 2 drop in my aggro deck. Like at that point, like if you're trying to be a red white aggro deck, you just literally have to take Nifcrop and Tingler, and it sucks because you didn't prioritize them high enough or you got very unlucky, one of the two. But um, and then you have to pass a premium uncommon that you want above Nefcrop and Tingler 90% of the time, and instead you have to take this less powerful card just to fill out your mana curve. But it's the correct pick
Mm-hmm.
because just if you, especially if you have an aggressive deck or if the format it leans towards aggression, then filling out your mana curve is really important.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess this is another example, like a counterpoint. So in this format, a lot of the decks aren't very aggressive, and you don't always get punished if you don't have a 2 drop. And so you could, if like let's say if you're drafting like a green deck and you don't have very many 2 drops, and you open up some kind of really powerful rare or a really powerful removal spell,
Mm-hmm.
like you're probably okay to just take that card because this format is much slower than past formats, and like the mana curve is still important. Like you still need to take it, especially if you're trying to curve out and be aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have other win conditions where you win the late game, like you can kind of hedge and try to like not take a 2 drop, especially because you can replace it with almost anything. Like you don't need an aggressive 2 drop. You can just take a Dune Beetle and you'll be fine. And so it definitely depends on what the format, like how aggressive the format is, what kind of deck you're trying to build. All of those can kind of lead towards influencing what mana curve, like how much attention you need to play on the mana curve.
Yeah.
I think the most critical is the 2 drops. That's the one that comes up all the time.
Yep. So I think we're kind of talking about the next point, which is identifying what you need. So when we say that, we mean we're looking at your deck. You know, you're thinking about what you have in your pool, and a pet comes up like Ambuscade versus Naga Vitalis, right? So
Mhm.
sorry, not Naga, not a what's Oasis Ritualist. I don't know why I get those two confused every time, but regardless, you know, figuring out what your deck needs in that spot can weigh in pretty heavily, right? Because if you already have 2 Oasis Ritualists, you might be like, well, this third one's nice, but maybe I just need this Ambuscade. And how do you kind of like determine those kind of things, Danny?
Yeah, or vice versa, right? So Ambuscade's probably the better card, but
Mm-hmm.
if you have a bunch of big finishers and you don't have any ramp spells yet, like Oasis Ritualist makes your deck better, and
Mm-hmm.
so you take that because that's what you need. That's when like that's a lot of the skill of drafting. Is at the end of the day, you're trying to draft a deck, not like the like if you just had a pick order for the whole set, then that wouldn't draft a good deck. Like it doesn't work like that. You're that's what makes drafting so fun is that you're really building a deck as you go and you get so many choices. Like you make like 45 choices or something, right?
Yeah.
So you just get so many choices that you really have a large influence on what your deck looks like at the end. And so identifying what you need is probably like the number one skill that I would say in drafting is knowing how to draft a deck, knowing what like at what point you need to take which cards. I think that's like an overall statement of saying like this is what makes a good drafter. And what I think the best rule of thumb, I use this rule of thumb in sealed more than in draft, but I think it applies here too, is having like a clear win condition.
Mm-hmm.
Because in limited, a lot of times you'll just kind of have a pile of cards, and your cards don't really do anything. And if you think about it, you might lose, and you're like, oh well, I just drew too many lands, or I drew too many spells, got me screwed. But sometimes you'll lose just because like your cards just didn't do anything, or they didn't do anything cohesive. Like your opponent's deck had like a plan and executed it. And in sealed, that's really important because everyone's playing with all their best cards. And so I want to make sure that my sealed deck does something better than what my opponent's sealed deck is going to do. It doesn't have to do everything better, but it needs to have like an axis that I can win on, whether it's flyers, whether it's casting a mythic rare that I think is better, like one of the best in the format, or having lots of removal for their mythic rares and just random guys that can kill them, or aggressive curve. Like you can win in lots of different ways. And draft's the same way. Like you need to identify what your deck is good at, how you're going to win, and then especially towards the end, you need to pick the card that fits your deck. Like what's going to fill the holes that you need.
Yeah. Yeah, and we talked about how it's 45 picks, and it's really way more than that. You're really making hundreds and hundreds of decisions every draft because you see 15 cards, and you see 14 and 13. You go through that process a few times. And while some of them do get rolled out, I mean, this is why, draft is such a skill testing format. And, you see people like Reed and Huey, even though they're opening random packs and getting random cards every time, they're just consistently performing because it is a game of skill. And it is, that thing is a skill that's very important. I think you're kind of moving into our next point, so let's just bring it up right now while we're talking about this. And this is power level of the card. So we've kind of danced around this the whole time, but when you're looking at a card, how much does power level outweigh staying on color, staying on stuff like that, especially in the earlier picks? Obviously, pack 3, it's like you open a Glorybringer, but you're like, well, I'm, whatever, blue-black, can't pick this. Like, how important does that stuff matter to you?
So I think the power level is like the determining factor. So we talked about all of these kind of peripheral things, but like overall, we're just trying to figure out what the most powerful card is. And it has, like, talking about power level in a vacuum, people weigh it differently. So I always try to kind of give myself outs to have a busted deck. And so, like in pack 1, I try to have mostly one color in case I open a bomb rare. I can just kind of jump into that color also. Or I've really enjoyed drafting these green decks for the same reason, because if I open a Locust God in my green deck, I can just take it. Like I'll cast the Locust God. Like
Slam.
It's fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's like a really, really powerful place to be, because especially in pack 3, people are locked in. Like if I have a red white aggro deck and I open Liliana's Mastery, or I open the demon,
Archfiend.
Archfiend. Like I don't have a choice. Like if there's a good card for me, if there's a 2-drop, a removal spell, a flyer, anything for my like I'm just gonna take those cards. Like it's not worth it to hate pick or like hate draft at that point. So you get really, really rewarded for like drafting a deck that can pick up that power, like the cards that are powerful at like a cost to your mana base normally, but they're normally worth it because like the really good cards are really good, and especially in limited, you're playing with a 40 card deck, you'll see it like half your matches or something.
Yeah, and the removal is just so bad in recent sets. I mean, this set's pretty good, but
no, there's lots of sets where like in the gods, there's like literally one card that answers gods in the whole format. Like if you open a Scarab God or a Locust God, like
that's game.
Low. Yeah, they don't have function. I mean, black has some higher rarity reward, but it gets tough. And those cards, no, you can't beat those cards unless you're like super far ahead. Yeah. So power level is definitely like the main determining factor of what you're picking. Mm-hmm. And if I try to hedge so that I can have a higher power level, but it's hard. Like it's always tough calls when you want to jump ship and just play the Glorybringer anyway, right?
Yeah, it's tough. Yeah, and I think that's just like a big one. Like talking about things like Pride Sovereign versus Ambuscade and stuff like that. Just there's all these different power level picks, and both those cards are really good. But like, which one do you decide is better? Like opening up, and I think it's Pride Sovereign. But regardless, yeah. These are just things you have to think about, and when you put all these things together, you set yourself up for success. That's when luck strikes, when hard work and dedication meet. Boom.
I agree.
Yep. All right, so that's going to do it for our training grounds. I think that was good. I think we went over everything. It's pretty solid. Yep.
It was definitely a hard one to cover. I feel like we're trying it's like one of the main points of draft, right? Like how you make a close pick. That's like those are like all the critical points of a draft. And so it's tough to try to narrow it down to certain options, but hopefully it was helpful and like trying to just like think about those different ideas every time that you're making a pick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if you like had any more questions or anything, you can always tweet at DJ Cathler to get a hold of Danny.
Yeah.
If for some reason you wanted my opinion over someone else's, you can get a tweet at SOV Mason. You can find Danny on Facebook on the Constructive Criticism Family and Critics group. And you can find me there as well as each week on Twitch TV/CCMTG, where we stream the show weekly, and we also stream Constructive Criticism weekly. There you go. We wanted to give a huge shout out to the patrons. We talked about it before, but you guys that are patrons really make the show doable and help us want to keep raising the bar and do harder and harder topics like this. And I think this is a topic we're definitely going to probably revisit in the future, just because it's such a all-encapsulating, like the essence of what a draft is topic that we might need to revisit it in a different format, where maybe we're not just referencing green the whole time because green's just so great. But
Green is so it's so good in this format. It's really and it's interesting. That's the best part. It's really unique.
Yeah, and it's also a fun way to play it. I mean, you get to play all these sweet cards and everything each draft, which is nice. I've got a pull from tomorrow green deck on my Moto account right now.
Yeah,
let's go.
Great.
Yep. Yeah. All right, but no, seriously, without you, the patrons, this wouldn't be doable. As always, if you have any ideas for the show and your patron, let us know. We want to definitely hear them. So normally this would be the "How Would You Build It" segment of the show. But Danny is super busy with the Pro Tour, and then Spencer's moving, and then I'm busy with the RPTQ in real life. So there's no How Would You Build It this week. And I'm going to be honest, there probably won't be one next week. But 2 weeks from now, we're getting back on it. We're going to have some How Do You Build It. And then when Ixalan comes out, we're definitely building pirates and dinosaurs. We can't not. We're going to be on top of it.
All of the pirates. All
yeah.
Of them.
I'm in charge now. So it's just like, get them while it's good. So, thank you. Danny, do you have any shout-outs or anything?
I think I'm good. I'm tired. I got in last night, so I'm like still...
Oh, you're still jet-lagged.
Yeah, I mean, I like mostly functioned today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fine. All right. Well, thank you everyone for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the show, and we will see you all next week.
Have a good one.